Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. This is the first webinar of our free Membership Growth Online Summit 2017. And every day this week at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, a top expert is going to join us to share the growth strategies used by successful organizations to grow and to keep growing, and especially in today's world where it seems harder than ever to get anyone's attention. So welcome to day one of the summit. And this afternoon we have Amanda Kaiser joining us, and Amanda is an expert on how to attract and engage members, particularly younger members, and it's your younger members, of course, who are going to make sure your organization has a future. So I'm really glad Amanda could be here with us today to share her experience and her expertise, and we'll bring Amanda on very shortly. In the meantime, let me just briefly introduce myself. My name is Donald Cowper, and that's my face there on the left of your screen, and I'm on the Wild Apricot content team, and beside me is my colleague Rano, and yes, that is a giant snake around his neck, not a scarf. I'm happy to tell you that he didn't bring that snake in to the office today. And despite being a fan of snakes, I want to tell you that Rano is the most wonderful person, and I'm really happy to have him here with us today because he's going to help everyone here with any technical issues you might have. So during the webinar, feel free to ask any questions to us or to Amanda, and to do that, you can use the chat box. And before moving on, I want to make a couple of quick reminders. The first is that I want to let you know that we are recording this webinar and the other summit webinars this week, and we'll be sending you an email with a link to the recordings sometime next week after the summit is all over, so please watch out for that. I also want to let you know that by attending today, you are eligible to earn 1 CAE credit for today's webinar. And we'll get going in just another couple of minutes, but let me briefly say that today's webinar is being brought to you by Wild Apricot. And I know that many of our customers are on with us today, so it's great to have you back with us. A big welcome to all of you. But I also know that we have many people here who aren't familiar with Wild Apricot, and I want to welcome you as well. And for those of you who don't know, I'll just very briefly tell you that Wild Apricot is membership management software. It's actually an all-in-one solution for anyone running a membership organization, and that's because you can manage your member and contact database, you can run your events, build your website, process all your payments, and so on. And many of our customers consider it a lifesaver because it saves them hours a day in administrative tasks, freeing them up to focus on fulfilling their organization's mission. And we're quite thrilled with what many of our clients have been able to accomplish. And we've watched many of them grow since we started 10 years ago, and they've watched us grow as well. And thanks to our customers, we've been ranked as the #1 rated membership management software solution on the market for the last 5 years running. And everyone here at Wild Apricot is very proud of the great software that we provide, but we're also a leading provider of free educational content like today's webinar. So if any of you happen to have any questions about Wild Apricot, I want to let you know that we'll stick around and we're happy to answer them at the end of the webinar. And you're all free to stick around with us as well to ask any questions if you happen to have any. Okay, so now I want to introduce today's presenter. Amanda Kaiser is a qualitative researcher for the association industry, and she's conducted over 345 in-depth member interviews, and it's through these conversations, that she has come to understand the goals of members, their challenges, and their worries, and she has translated these insights into strategies that exponentially improve member engagement. She's also the author of the ebook. I'll pull it up here, picture of that, Fueling Exceptional New Member Experience, which you can download for free. And my colleague Rano beside me is going to paste a link in the chat box where you can get that book. Click on that and you can get a copy of the book. And I want to let you know that Amanda also writes a weekly blog for association professionals at smooththepath.net. Rano is also going to just include the link there in the chat. And now we're going to bring on Amanda. So Amanda, Please, a warm welcome to you. It's wonderful to have you here with us today. I want to thank you so much for everything you've done in preparation for today and for being here this afternoon. And I'm going to pass the presentation over to you now.
Great. Thank you, Donald. Thank you for such a warm welcome. I really appreciate that. And let me advance one slide because I wanted to start out by sharing a personal story with everyone. So my grandmother used to spend her summers in a really small cabin on a small lake in Maine. And one night when I was about 12 years old, my family was up there and we're all sitting around a campfire a lot like the one you're looking at now. And so if you can imagine a horseshoe shape of beach chairs ringing the campfire with the campfire in the middle. At one side was my dad, next to him was my Uncle Tim, and then there was a chair between my Uncle Tim and I that had a paper bag filled with fireworks on it and a beach blanket. Then there was me, and a chair for my friend Chris, and a chair for my sister, and a chair for my grandmother. Now, my Uncle Tim lived in Norfolk, Virginia, and the only time we ever got to see him was a week or two in the summer in Maine. And when he and my dad got together, it was a joke a minute. They were really funny guys. And they loved telling these tall tales about when they were kids. And my dad was just finishing up one of these stories about their childhood. It was a story about when the brothers had done something really exciting and probably something very dangerous. They probably risked life and limb, which seemed like something they were always prone to doing. So he closed the story by throwing up his arms and saying, and then there was pandemonium. And we all laughed a little bit, except for my friend Chris, who looked at my dad and said, Stu, what does pandemonium mean? Well, while we were talking, my sister and my grandmother were off on the other side of the beach, and they had lit sparklers, and they were writing their names in the sky. And during the storytelling, my grandmother had inched closer and closer to the fire circle until she was standing right over that paper bag, the paper bag filled with fireworks. She was holding a lit sparkler in her hand, and I'm sure you can guess what happened next. A spark flew off with the sparkler and slowly drifted down to that paper bag. And before any of us knew what was going on, that paper bag erupted into flame. And in no time at all, bottle rockets were just shooting all over the beach. And firecrackers were kabanging and making a heck of a racket, and Roman candles were sending their colorful fireballs just everywhere. Well, I kind of tipped over and dove for the ground, and out of the corner of my eyes, I could see everybody else running for the hills, except for my Uncle Tim, who amazingly had the presence of mind to grab that beach blanket. He threw it over the bag of fireworks and the chair and threw the entire mess into the lake. And there was a little bit of bubbling, and then thankfully, nothing. It was quiet. Now, if you can imagine, it was dark, and the entire beach is filled with smoke and the smell of brimstone. Do you all know the smell of fireworks? It was like that times like 1,000. Now, I'm having a hard time seeing anything because the images of fireworks are etched in my retina, and I can hardly hear anything because of all of that noise. But now it's quiet and it's dark, if not a little bit stinky, and we pick ourselves up and we find our chairs, and I open up my beach chair and settle it back on the sand and sit down in my chair, and we all find our places again and sit down in a stunned silence. And after a while, my uncle says, well, Chris, that's pandemonium. Now, this story cracks me up every time I tell it. We tell it a lot in family gatherings because this was my uncle. I mean, he had such timing, and he was so funny and smart and confident, and he was so put together. And at the time when I was just 12 years old, I would look at him and I'd think, oh, it's going to be great to be an adult. I don't have that much poise and humor now, but when I get to be like him, when I get to be an adult, I'll be just like him. And that's the first time I think I really thought about the generation gap. And the next time I thought about it was when I was working my first job. Let me go back one. The first job, I was working at Crayola. I started working there when I was 25 years old. And I was hired to work in a particular department in Crayola in marketing. And the person who was the next oldest in age to me was 9 years older than I was. And that was my boss. And the person that was next older than her was 11 years older than her. So essentially, in my department in marketing, 75 people, everybody in the department was roughly 20 or more years older than we were. Now, I was amazed by my colleagues. They were brilliant. They were kind. They had so much experience. They were seemingly omniscient. And they had this amazing store of experiences that I didn't have. Now, additionally, their lives are really different than mine. When I arrived to Pennsylvania to work for Crayola, everything that I owned fit in the trunk of my very grumpy Honda Civic. In fact, every day when I put my key into the ignition, it was an adventure to see whether it would even work or not. And they were in a different phase of life. They all had houses and kids and dogs and spouses and cars that were not nearly as grumpy as mine. Now, the work at Crayola fascinated me, and my colleagues were wonderful, but it was lonely. I was the only one at kind of my career stage there. And I think we're wired to notice age. We're really sensitive to this. And this is a problem for many organizations. I work a lot with professional and trade associations, and there's a term in our industry called the graying of associations. And what that means is that the average age of membership is continually increasing. And this is a huge worry for many associations and many member-based organizations, because it's something that could become self-perpetuating. When younger members don't find other younger members, they probably won't stick around. And again, this is because we are super wired to notice folks who are our age. Now, why this is a problem for many organizations, it's not a problem for every organization. Some folks are really knocking it out of the park, and they're attracting and they're engaging a lot of younger members. And so I'd like you for a second to think a little bit about what your goals are for younger members. Do you need to attract more younger members? Is the average age of the members at your organization, is it increasing? So you want to attract more. Or maybe you are attracting younger members, but the problem is keeping them. You know, are you able to get them in with a real high frequency, but they only stay a year and leave? So do you want to retain more younger members? Or maybe your association or organization is engaging, is doing a fine job attracting younger members, but maybe you feel like you need to engage them more. You need to get them involved more. You need to get them to contribute more. So what are your goals? In fact, what I'd love to do is I'd love to hear from you. Don, if you would launch that first poll, that would be fantastic.
Great. I
would love for you to chime in.
Okay, great. I'm going to launch that poll. I'm just going to pull up. Everyone might be able to see a control panel getting in the way, but that'll just be temporary. I just had to pull up the poll and launch it. I'm going to launch it now. So you've got a question there. What are your younger member goals? And select all the options there that apply. Attract more younger members, engage more younger members, attract more grads to the profession or industry, get more younger members to contribute. So I'll just leave this up for a few more seconds and give everyone a chance to just click and respond. Okay, I'm going to close the poll in just a few seconds. So 3, 2, 1, I'm going to close the poll now. Thanks everybody for responding. Okay, and I will share the results. And I'll send it back to you, Amanda. There, you've got the results up.
Great. Great, thank you. Yeah, so what are your younger member goals? Most everybody, it's attract and engage younger members. So we'll linger here for a few minutes and talk about that. For some, it's attract grads. Not too many, about a third of those who voted. But also getting high scores was getting more younger members to contribute. So we'll linger there as well. So let's head on back to the slides and dive right into some examples for you.
Great, and I'll just hide the poll now so you can move forward.
Great. Okay. So before I get into some really juicy examples, I felt like at this point it made a whole lot of sense to explain the reasons why younger members aren't joining. And at the very beginning in his introduction, Donald talked a little bit about the work that I do. So I am a qualitative researcher, and I conduct member interviews for a living. As of today, I have conducted 345 member interviews on behalf of many different types of organizations, generally trade and professional associations. And so I am talking to folks who come from all different backgrounds, all different professions, and all different industries. And while their organizations are very different and their members, members can be quite different from each other, I do see a lot of patterns across the data. Now, in fact, younger members tell me why they don't join, and it's typically for one of three reasons. The first reason is they just don't know about the association. They had never heard of it. Now, if they had heard about the association, the second reason is they don't think it's for them. And generally what they will tell me is, yes, I have heard of the association, but I never thought to join because I thought it was for somebody else in my organization and not for me. I thought maybe it was for my boss or for my boss's boss. Now, if they knew about the association and they knew it was for them, the third reason why they don't join is they don't see the value for themselves. And what they typically say is, yeah, I knew it was there, but I really didn't see how it could benefit me. And those are the reasons why younger members or young professionals typically don't join organizations. But some do join. We do see some organizations making huge headway in this area, and I did bring some examples to share with you. So the first example comes from the Special Forces Association. There's a lot of you who said that you want to attract more younger members. You're in super good company. And this is the case that I hear from a lot of my clients and a lot of organizations out there, that they want to attract more younger members. So the Special Forces Association, if you've not heard of them, they are the Association of the Army Green Berets. And they looked into their data and they saw that something very alarming was going on, that the average age of membership was high and it was increasing. They had an aging membership, and what they noted was that young veterans were not joining. Now, one problem they identified was the demographics of members had changed quite considerably. And so they thought back to the beginning and they said, wow, membership in 1968, our membership was largely unmarried, and these folks were going to serve in Vietnam. But now the younger special forces are married and they have kids. And understanding how their member demographics had changed, and they started to put together what new members' needs were. And they wanted to help their new members reach their needs, and they wanted to make some changes to their offerings. So they did two things. The first thing they did is they started to schedule conferences and family-friendly destinations coupled with family-friendly activities. So, these folks, people who join the Special Forces, they're away from their families an awful lot. And the association said, wouldn't it be a shame to force them to participate with the association and be away from their families even more? So we're going to schedule a conference in Jacksonville, Florida. It's very affordable, and it's a place where families can splash around in the ocean and really enjoy a vacation away. The other thing that they've started doing, and I find this really interesting, is they've also started having programming that reaches out not just to the member, but to the spouse of the member. Now, here's a special insight that I pulled from my research that's related to this. I find in my research that in some associations, these associations serve members where the member's career really defines them. And I find that this happens in two instances. If somebody's career defines them, it's because their career is very dangerous, or it is very time-consuming, or both. And so think about folks like the Special Forces. It's dangerous and it's time-consuming. They're away from their families a lot. Policemen, doctors, very time-consuming job. And so if your career really defines you, these associations are starting to add a ton of value when they're offering programming for their spouses, generally for free. If you can educate, if you can help, if you can give benefit to the person supporting the member the most, that adds a lot of value. Now, like Donald said, if you have any questions about what I'm saying, please go ahead and jot them down in the chat area. We're going to be reviewing your questions very shortly, about midway through this presentation. And so I just want to give you a chance to make sure that you go into chat, write down your questions, and we'll review them and try to provide as many answers as we can. So back to our show. Let's go on to the very next slide and an example. So this one comes from the Radio, Television, Digital News Association, and it's all about engaging younger members. Now, RTDNA is a very small association, and it's the Association for Broadcast Journalists. What they knew is they needed to retain these younger broadcast journalists. Those folks were coming in, and they were very quickly leaving the association, and they decided to tackle this issue with a newly developed incubator group. So they called this group the Next Gen Program for Next Generation of Journalists. That group met, and they met with the staff. The staff hosted it along with the board, and they facilitated this really nice conversation among the board staff and this next generation of journalists, and really talked to these folks about what their jobs were like. A lot of them had very non-standard jobs. They weren't working for the big networks. What are your jobs like? What is the industry like? What is the work environment like? What are you dealing with? What do you think young professionals need in the industry? Now, after having that conversation and having a few others follow-ups via phone, the plan is to bring at least one big idea forward so they understand fully what this next generation of journalists, what their problems are. They're going to grab one of those problems and try to innovate on it. If this test goes really well, they're going to repeat it next year with a new group of young professionals. Now, here's another special insight from my research related to this. Now, what I think RTDNA is doing is they're trying to develop an association value trigger point. You know, you might be asking, what is an association value trigger point? Well, it's a concept that I found through my research. And simply, it's the point at which most new members realize the value of their membership. And usually this coalesces around one thing. So if you're an association or if your organization has a value trigger point, there's one benefit that's really attracting and engaging younger members. For one of my clients, their association value trigger point is a New to the Profession Academy. For another, it was their monthly webinar series. And your value trigger point it's unique from organization to organization. And not everyone has one. So if you have one, you might not be leveraging it as the gateway to other benefits. Or if you don't have one, no worries, you can invent one. Donald talked a little bit about an ebook that I wrote. If you're interested in this association value trigger point concept, there is a lot more about it in my ebook. Let's just touch real quickly on this, because this was about 1/3 of the respondents said that they 1/3 of you said that they wanted to attract more grads to the profession. And I hear this across a lot of associations in particular, if there's any associations out there listening into this. There are a lot of professions and industries that are noticing a super huge gap between the number of retirees that are leaving the industry or profession and the number of qualified grads getting ready to take their place. The aerospace industry has this exact issue. There's not enough graduates jumping into those STEM degrees to replace all of the retirees that are leaving. So the Aerospace Industries Association decided to start something called the Team America Rocketry Challenge. Now, if you are familiar with the X Prize, it's a kind of a smaller version of the X Prize. High school teams get together and they build rockets, and then they compete in a national contest, which has got to be the coolest thing for a high school student. And it's a really interesting way to get students excited about this career path. Now, I know there's a lot of ways that organizations are attracting grads into a profession or into an industry or into a club. This is just one example that I thought that was very, very interesting to bring to you. Okay, and let's move on to helping younger members volunteer, helping them contribute. Now, some associations or some organizations say that they can attract, engage, and retain younger members, but they also want to give them much more of a voice. They want these younger members to step up and to contribute or volunteer in very different capacities. Now, interestingly, when I do member interviews, I often hear this issue raised by longtime members. It's not the younger members that really talk about this so much as it's longtime members. And I pulled a verbatim from one of the interviews. Now, this is a longtime member, and he said exactly this. He said, you know, our meetings are boring. We're talking about the same old issues. And I think too many of us usual presenters are tired old goats. There are young tigers out there that need to be heard. Now that's a verbatim from one of the interviews. I think he had a really interesting way of saying that. And I think what is happening on the organizational side is it's a hard thing to identify quality speakers, new quality speakers. Now, I used to work as a director of marketing for the National Association of Colleges and Employers, and we were always trying to identify new speakers. And one of the ways that we did that is we would go and attend, the staff would go and attend member roundtables. And at those roundtables, we'd work really hard to identify people who were talking at the roundtables and who were experimenting with new ideas, ideas that during the roundtable seemed to get a lot of interest. And we talked to them about submitting a proposal and whether they were interested in becoming a speaker. And that was one of the ways that the association got new speakers. Associations can also, if you've got a mentor-mentee program, you can also go out to all of your mentors and say, hey, what innovative experiments are you seeing your mentees trying? Let us know who they are. We'd love to reach out to them. So speaking may not be on a younger member's radar, but their ideas can certainly trickle up as older members advocate for them. And then there's another part of this as well. It's not just about speaking or writing or contributing in that way. Some organizations want younger members' voice on their board. They really want somebody to be on their board that's a younger member and to hear that voice. Unfortunately, the way a lot of boards are set up, it's really hard to get somebody younger on the board. So I heard about this wildcard board member idea. And if you haven't heard about it, there was a board that recognized that it takes about 20 years of progressive volunteering for a member to actually take a seat on the board. And in that way, if that's the case, then you just can't get a younger member on the board. So they decided to set aside 1 or 2 seats for younger members. And so a younger member could raise their hand, and if they were elected, they would get on the board in about 1 to 2 years. And so that way you had a younger professional, a new member voice on the board. So this is a really great place to stop and see if there are any questions. If you do have a question, go ahead and jot it down in the chat area. We have time, Donald, for about maybe two questions, and then there's some more time at the end.
Great. Okay, so we've got quite a few questions here. So let's just do a couple at least. So what's the best way to survey our members to figure out what's pulling them away from engaging?
Okay, yeah, this is perfect. In the second part of this webinar, I'm actually going to talk in detail about 3 ways that you can get a lot closer to your members. So if you don't mind, I would love to hold that question because we're going to be diving into that in depth very shortly.
Okay, and then do you think it's important to discount membership fees and event registration fees for young members? Good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. Okay, so I just did another piece of research with a couple of things rose up. So if your younger members are particularly price sensitive, yes, discounting membership might be a great way to get them in. The problem then becomes is as they become more senior in their career, how do you move them from discounted membership to full membership? And so you might set a precedent that you find hard to get over. So just keep that in mind. Another way that folks have got around this is they have said, maybe we won't discount membership, but we're going to discount some kind of extra benefit. So maybe it's not core benefit, but it's something that you would have to buy extra, like a piece of research or a guidebook or another kind of educational opportunity or conference. And we will discount that, or we will give it to a new or young member for free. And in that way, we're sampling our value and sampling our benefits. And that's really important because younger members come into the association and they really don't understand how it is going to benefit them. So if you can get them to sample really early on, that's a great way to think about discounting as well as by discounting some benefits. And Donald, I think we probably have a chance for maybe one more question.
Okay, so someone's asking, how can you prepare long-standing members into accepting younger members? That's probably a good question. I like that.
Long-time members into accepting younger members. Yeah. So, gosh, it seems like some organizations' cultures are just wired for this. It could start with the board, or maybe you have there's a whole move around micro volunteering. People who can't necessarily step into a board position because that's so time consuming, but they do want to help out the organization. And so maybe you say, what we really need is a welcoming committee. We really need somebody calling new and younger members, or we really need somebody specifically buddying up with new or younger members at our conference or educational events, or we just need somebody by registration who's going to welcome everybody who comes in. And if you happen to see a younger member badge, please talk to them. I've got one client where the board is very much wired to notice younger members and notice that new member badge at the conference. And the board members themselves will walk around the conference and spend some time just saying hi to new members, first-time attendees, and not just a quick hi and smile, but it's, how are you? Where are you from? Where'd you fly in from? And all of that makes such a huge impression on a younger member or a brand new member, that, somebody is personally welcoming them in. That's super important. That's a great question. Okay, so let's dive back in. Now, thanks so much again for the questions. As questions occur to you, you can continue to send them through to us in the chat, and we're going to have another Q&A session near the top of the hour. We're going to try to get to some more questions. Now, what you might be thinking is, hearing what others are doing is great, and what I really hope is some of these examples have sparked some ideas for you. But I also know that not all of our organizations are the same. They're really quite different, and perhaps even though you have some of the same younger member goals as another organization, the solution that you need to achieving that goal could be quite unique. So how do you successfully get from goal, the goal that you have for your younger members, to a really viable, really successful solution? Well, what I brought today is a 3-step process to do just that. It's a 3-step process for attracting and engaging these younger members. Now, I used to work for Crayola, as I said, and we use this 3-step problem-solving process, and some would call it an innovation process. It is a great process for trying to reach really any new business goal. And this process did get its roots in consumer products companies like Crayola and Procter & Gamble, but it's also been successfully used among a number of different industries, including nonprofits. So if you may be familiar with IDEO. IDEO is an innovation company. They have a fantastic blog and a fantastic podcast. And so if you're interested in innovation, they give a tremendous amount of knowledge away for free. And they're an innovation company or an innovation consultancy, and they help others across, whether it's for-profit, nonprofit, charitable organizations, they help others be far more innovative. And they started using this 3-step process that I'm going to be talking about in the for-profit sector. But after working with companies like Apple, Microsoft, Bigelow Tea, Ford, Lincoln Motor Company, they decided to try to set their sights on services. And through their work with services, they helped healthcare, hospitals really rethink healthcare. They help change insurance. They help bankers help their customers be smarter with their money. And now they've started out a foundation, and they're using their process to solve social issues like the lack of clean water in third world countries, how to do urban farming better, and more. So this 3-step process is super flexible. While I used it at Crayola, I adapted to use it at the National Association of Colleges and Employers as well. So what I want you to know is this is super tried and true, and it can work for you as well. So at the heart of this 3-step process is something called human-centered design. And if you haven't heard of human-centered design, you might have heard of design thinking. It's something that's just starting to bubble up in the nonprofit world. So the premise is that you start with your user or your customer, or more specifically for us, your member in mind first. And this is really important because there's really two ways to innovate. One way to innovate is to go off and design something really cool and then go in search of an audience to sell it. And we see this happening in very, very large companies. They've got an R&D department of really super smart scientific folk who develop the next best thing, and they take it to management, and then management decides whether it's going to move forward, and then they take it to marketing, and marketing needs to go find an audience for it. But the second way to innovate, and this second way we see a lot in the podcast arena and the blog arena, is folks share content, and by doing that, they develop an audience of like-minded people. And then the host or the authors go back to the community and ask them what they need. They ask them what their problems are. And then they, based on the feedback that they get, they then go back out to the community with some solutions. And this is called human-centered design. And I call it member-centered design because it's perfect for member organizations. We already have the community. We just need to listen much more to those members who love us the most. Okay. So there's three parts to this member-centered design process. First, we discover. We determine what the problem is from our members' point of view. And in this section, we're going to touch directly on that question that was asked in Q&A. You know, how do you find out? How do you find out what your members need and how to engage them more? The second step is design. Then we try a whole bunch of solutions. And the third step is test. We see what solution may solve the problem the best. So we're going to talk about three really good steps that you can take to solve your new member goal. Okay, so discover is the first, and this is the most important phase and also the most overlooked phase by many organizations. In this step of the process, we place ourselves in our members' shoes and look at the industry and the profession, and also back at our own organization through their eyes. So essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to step into our members' shoes. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about three not often used but very powerful techniques that you can use in this phase. Excuse me. The first one is imagine. I skipped a step here. Look at that. No, I'm sorry. I got confused with my slides for a second. The first technique is observe. So let's talk about observe. Okay, so observe is the holy grail of consumer research, but it's something that's a little bit hard for us to do in member-oriented organizations, because usually, it's not like we're a retailer. It's not like we can be out there on the floor in a store observing our customers. But there are a few cases where we might be able to observe new members or younger members. So if you happen to put on a conference and you can peel yourself away from hosting the conference, watch those younger members. Are they networking? Are they engaging? Are they having a harder time joining in? If you don't have a conference, are there any other ways in which you see people face-to-face or maybe even online interacting in a course or a webinar? Do you do an orientation or a training specifically for them? Are they able to participate? At which level are they participating? Are they diving right in or are they pulling back? And by watching their reaction compared to maybe a longer time member's reaction, you'll get a sense of how to, where they're having some problems engaging with you. Now, I also realize that this technique is super impossible for some of you. If you're a smaller staff and you're hosting a conference or you're hosting an event, you are 150% engaged with hosting that event and there's no time for anything else. So if you can't do this technique, no worries, we have some more for you. And the second thing that you can do, darn it, I did it again, is imagine. Now, this is another discovery technique, and it really is all about imagining. It's about acting or behaving or imagining that you are one of your members, and you're interacting with the association the way the member would. Now, I have facilitated this imagining technique with groups and clients before, and I've called it imaginative empathy. And I'd like to do that with you for just a minute now. I want you to imagine that you are a brand new member. And I want you to imagine that you're new to your career and you're new to the organization that you've just started working for. Your company sends you to a conference for the very first time, and you are alone at the conference. Nobody else from your organization is going with you. Now imagine that you spent all day getting to the conference. Maybe you took an airplane, or maybe you drove the whole way. You're exhausted, but the conference is starting this afternoon, and so you are walking down the concourse towards registration. How are you feeling? Are you feeling maybe perhaps a little anxious? It's your first conference. And you spend the day in sessions where everybody is using industry jargon and they're talking about acronyms that you've never heard about. But it seems like everybody else knows what they're talking about, and you don't. How do you feel now? I want you to imagine that it's the very end of the day and it's time to go to reception. You don't know anybody. You walk into the ballroom and it seems as if everybody is in the conversation except for you. How do you feel now? Now you can use imaginative empathy on any sort of member experience. If you have chapters, what's it like to walk into a high-performing chapter, or what is it like to be a first-time attendee or first-time member walking into a low-performing chapter? How is it to register for an event online? How is it to join online? You know, you can walk through all of these scenarios either by imagining or being a secret shopper. Try some of those things out as you are thinking about the barriers that new members might be realizing. Now, finally, the last technique for discovery is ask and listen. And so this is a super helpful tool. A lot of people, a lot of organizations look into their own data for insights. They look into surveys for insights, and that only gets you so far because both things only tell you how well you're doing with what you are already doing. But a big piece of the puzzle is understanding what members want and need and what their problems are outside of how we already serve them. And the only way to really get this kind of insight is to ask and listen. So how do you do this the best? Well, I suggest that literally in in-depth phone conversations, you ask your members a series of questions, and they'll be happy to help. You know, ask them questions like, what are your biggest professional challenges? Or thinking about the profession and industry, what worries you the most as you look 5 years into the future? Or if we turned the reins over to you and made you CEO of this organization today, what would you focus on first? Now, those 3 questions are specially designed to understand what members' problems are, the problems that they're having in their with their career today, or in their profession today. And when you really listen to those answers, when you listen to those answers across many, many members, you start to see patterns in the responses, and those patterns will help you understand the key challenges that your younger members are facing. And their challenges are exactly your opportunity to help them. Okay, so that is the Discover section. In Discover, there are 3 opportunities to really get much closer to your members. It's observe, imagine, and ask and listen. And just out of curiosity, I would love to launch the second poll, Don, and really understand of the 3 Discover techniques, what would you think you'd like to try out?
Great. So let me pull up the control panel here. You'll see probably a black box on your screen, many of you. Just ignore that. Okay. All right. Let me launch this. All right. You should see the question and the poll showing up right now. So of the Discover techniques, which would you like to try out? You've got observe, imagine, ask, and listen. And I'll just leave the poll up for a few more seconds. Okay. And just click all the ones that apply. Okay. So I'll leave it up for just a couple more seconds. I'm going to count down right now. So quickly get your answers in. 3, 2, 1. I'm going to close the poll. And I'll share the results. And there it is. There you see the results, everybody. And Amanda, off to you.
Thanks, Donald. Okay, so for most of you, it is ask and listen, which is fantastic. So if you are very interested in the ask and listen technique and want a lot more guidance around that, I believe Donald at the beginning of this said that I write a blog. It's on smooththepath.net. And I'm a qualitative researcher, and I write a lot of blog posts about how to do this. You know, certainly somebody like me can do this for you, or you can do it for yourself. And so there are a lot of blog posts if you search on member insights, if you search on qualitative research, where I detail out the kind of questions you might want to ask and how you can do it if you're short of time, if your members are short of time, you know, how you could ask maybe one question at a time and really get yourself very, very familiar with what your members' wants and needs are. So let's head back to the slideshow, Donald. Thank you very much for that poll.
Let me just close that. Give me a second. Okay, there we are.
Wonderful. Okay. There we go. Okay. So design. The next step in our three-step process is design. We've done the discovery. We know what our members' problems are, and now it is time to create the solution. What we're going to do now is we're going to run through 3 sequential tasks to really get down design. Now, if you have spent enough time in discovery stage, you're really going to understand your members' needs, challenges, fears, worries, opinions, and thought process. And you're also going to have this very large, very messy pile of insights. Now, it's really necessary at this point to sort through all of this and start pulling forward what is most important for our members, but what is very doable and on mission for us. And so what I'm proposing here is very much a balancing act. We're going to ask ourselves, okay, with our limited resource, what problem do we really want to solve? But we're also going to look at it from our members' point of view. What problems are hurting our members the most? What problem is most painful to them if left unsolved? And then back to us, what problem can we solve with our strengths and resources? And I really encourage you to start with only one problem, because we can always loop back around and select another problem and run through the process later. You know, again, so just to start, select one problem and make it a medium-sized problem. What you're going to find is your members will have very small problems, super easy to solve. They'll have medium-sized problems, and then they'll have the big, hairy, difficult, impossible problem that everybody's been talking about for the last 5 years. Don't pick the big, hairy, awful one. Pick a medium-sized problem and go ahead and work through the process with that medium-sized problem. I'm only saying this because if you pick that medium-sized problem, you'll have a great chance of getting it through this process and innovating something very cool. The next step is ideating. And there are so many ways to solve a problem. And so what we want to do here is the goal is just to get as many ideas on the table as possible. Usually there's no one right solution, but the more ideas you get on the table, the better off you are. And so think about some methods for ideating. Think about brainstorming. And I want to give you some best practices for brainstorming. Get 5 to 8 of the most creative people into the room, most creative thinkers into the room. Some may be staff, some may be members, some may be complete outsiders with a fresh perspective, and all of that is okay. Make sure you set ground rules. No idea is a bad idea. Make sure that you build on another's idea before offering your own. You know, think about the environment. Get people out of a conference center, or get people out of your conference room. You know, do all kinds of, you can do really interesting things. You can send exercises and topics in advance, so introverts in the group who are also great brainstormers have time to mull it over. So, you know, really think about ideating and getting as many ideas on the table as possible. So what you're looking for here is all of the possible solutions to that one member problem that you have. Finally, and this is a very much a underused step, is prototyping. And you might be looking at prototyping and saying, hey, isn't prototyping for-profit companies? Not at all. You know, what we want to do here is after you've done all of your ideating, you're going to notice that there are some ideas that sort naturally to the top. You've got maybe 2 to 3 solutions that probably work really well. And what you want to do at this point is you want to prototype. You want to make sure that these 3 ideas that you've kind of set them down on paper. You've done something so that everybody can look and react to the idea and make sure that we're all viewing these ideas in the same. You know, for companies, generally prototypes are for physical things, but for member-based organizations, a prototype is just writing the idea on paper, or it could be a diagram, or a wireframe, or a blueprint, or a video. It could be just about anything. And I'll give you one example. I do an awful lot of public speaking, and when I write a speech out, it sounds really great. But then I practice it. I'll stand in my living room and I'll deliver a presentation to my cat, who I can tell you is completely unimpressed. But in the giving it and actually saying the presentation out loud, I can hear the problems, and then I know how to go back and change. And that's the reason why we do prototyping, is you want to get something out for everybody to react to. Look for the problems, see if you think that it's really going to work. Okay, so we've talked about 3 sequential steps in our design phase. Pick your priorities, ideate, prototype. When you get to the prototype stage, at this point, you might find that you only have 1 or 2 ideas left to move forward with. And that brings us to our very 3rd step, which is test. It is the 3rd and final step, and it is another step that most organizations overlook, because when they get a couple of really great ideas and solutions to their members' problems, everybody just wants to go and they want to launch. But I got to tell you, this is super risky. So make sure that you get a chance to test. Find some really low-risk ways to figure out if your idea is the right idea and if there is enough momentum to launch this for real. I'll give you some quick examples. You know, think about professional development. If you're one of those organizations that trains or teaches your members something, instead of launching maybe a full-day conference, the idea or the thing that you test could start as a 3-minute video. You know, gauge interest in the topic, gauge interest in the speakers. If that seems to build some momentum, then try an online course. Maybe after the online course, you do something bigger, maybe a virtual summit like Wild Apricot is doing. And if that works, maybe you do an in-person symposium. So really, no matter the problem that you're trying to solve, whether it's how to attract or engage younger members, or grow your membership, or find more ways for members to contribute, this 3-step process can really get you there. And what we just walked through was a 3-step process that can harness design thinking. It's really doing what we do best as member-based organizations. It's putting members at the center each time we think about an organizational goal. And then these steps will really help you get there. And as I said, some of the most innovative companies in the world use this 3-step process, but organizations, nonprofit organizations, associations can use them too. If you like this webinar, feel free to check out my blog, smooththepath.net. And I thank you so much for all of you tuning in today. And thanks to Donald and the team for having me present this webinar. If we have time for a question or two, I'd love to field them.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Amanda. We'll send you a couple of questions. Okay, we got quite a few, so we'll just do a couple, and then I'll mention a way that, if you didn't get your question answered, that there'll be an opportunity for that. But first, here's a question. What are your thoughts about rebranding long-standing associations? And then I guess the industry mail is not going anywhere, but communication has broadened tremendously outside mail. Associations split on keeping and tossing old name and their acronym and their mission statement. So what are your thoughts on that, Amanda?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, and I think I hear that a lot in the nonprofit and association community, where folks are hoping to rebrand, and that will help draw more people in and more excitement and all of that. And I think it really depends. And so I think the big point of direction that I would give you is, before you do any rebranding, before you change your look, before you change anything, how you're reaching out to people, just really understand your members really, really well. And as soon as you use any of those discovery techniques, or all of those discovery techniques, that allow that to really steer your rebranding effort.
one quick one, and then there's a few other things I want to mention before we do close. So, what are the best places to recruit young members? Universities, social media, any other options?
Yeah. Again, I think this very much depends on the organization that you're working with and who your younger members are. So I know the CPA associations have a very long-standing tactic of sending CPA members out into universities and talking about the different industries and talking about the profession and recruiting members that way. Certainly could be via social media. It could be with new to the profession education. I think there's a lot of ways to go about doing that kind of thing. And it just really depends on who they are, who your new members are and where you can find them. Great question.
Well, thank you so much, Amanda. I know we're snuggling up to the top of the hour here. So I want to thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing your experience and your very insightful advice. I got a lot out of it, and I hope everyone else did. I do want to let everybody know that we are going to share the recording, remind you of that in a follow-up email next week after the summit is over. So please look out for that. And then I also want to mention that if you're new to Wild Apricot or have any questions for us, I'll cover some free resources and offers in just a moment. And if you're already familiar with Wild Apricot and you're anxious to continue the conversation and have questions about Amanda's presentation that we didn't get to, and I know there were very, very many of those, I encourage you to join our Facebook group. Rano is going to paste the link in now for anyone who wants to join. And it's, there we are. It's a great place to connect with your peers and our network of experts, and Amanda's a member of the group. So if you are new to Wild Apricot, before you jump over to Facebook, if that's what you want to do, I just quickly want to let you know that you can find more free educational content on our Academy, and Rano will paste the link in to the Academy in the chat. And then this is where you can find more webinars, including recordings of all our past webinars there. I also recommend you take a look at the resources and content on our blog and articles. There's lots of helpful content there about growing your membership, running successful events, recruiting volunteers, and so on. And all of that content is free. And lastly, if you are running a membership organization, whether that's a nonprofit, an association, a club, or any other type of organization, you are welcome to try our software at no cost for 30 days. So feel free to take advantage of this opportunity, especially if you're looking for ways to automate a lot of the tasks that consume your life. And Rano's going to paste the link in the chat window for that, where you can get that free trial. You just click on the link there. You'll be taken to our website where you can enter your email, your name, your organization name, and you're ready to go with your free trial. And if you'd like to receive a call from one of our coaches, just type your phone number into the chat and I'll make sure one of our coaches gets in touch with you. All right, so if you do have questions about Wild Apricot and you're able to stick around for a few minutes, I'm going to pass the mic over to my friend Rano, and he'll answer any questions you happen to have. We do tend to get a lot of questions about our software whenever we do a webinar, and one really common question is whether you can integrate an existing WordPress site with Wild Apricot, and the answer is yes. We have plugins for that, but of course you can certainly build your own site from scratch with Wild Apricot's website builder. So if you have any questions, just please type them in the chat, and I'm going to pass the mic over to Rano now. I want to personally thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Amanda, and here is Rano. Thanks.